Why does Jim Carroll need to meet Bob Seawright? You're going to find out. This is just press record. I mean, we got into Inagata Davida in book reports in seventh grade. We got into why your attention span might just happen to be the thing that's the length of your creative work. And then, of course, Kenny Loggins. We talked about Jimi Hendrix and Tadas Viscontas, all as timeless curators of the arts. Jack Forehand, let's roll some clips.
For every pathology, there's a profession. And it took me a while to find my pathology, but it turns out that my pathology was everything about the markets and Wall Street.
I eventually learned the best way for me to figure out what I thought and to figure out, at least for my standards, if what I thought cohered was by trying to write it.
The pond that I play in is too small for Citadel and Millennium and all these smart guys. I have no interest in competing with them. So I just fuss around with my little volatility exchange traded products and do just fine.
My wife says all the time, it's a lie that you can be anything. There aren't restrictions on you other than your own abilities and your own willingness to try.
That writing for me is a form of engagement, and it's a way to get feedback. It's a way to crystallize my own thinking.
I turned off the music and just thought about stuff, and I found I was unbelievably successful at finding stuff to write about or ideas or thinking through things because of the quiet.
You are watching Just Press Record right here on the Cultish Creative YouTube channel. I'm Matt Zeigler. This is the show where I invite two people who I am staggered. These two have never met each other, but it's true. They confirmed right before we pressed this button. And I'm proving to you and myself, hey, growing your network should be fun. Reflect on stuff. It's a good time. And you can follow along with all this at cultishcreative.com, where you can find the ways to connect with these guests, join their networks, and all that good stuff too. Let's get straight into the introductions. This first guest, if he was a 3 Beatles song mixtape, this is one of those short, like Maxwell tape editions, you know, like where you accidentally buy the 15-minute jobby and you go, you're like, what the hell is this? I don't have enough time for anything. You get it by accident. Well, track 1 on this guest playlist, it would have to be Obladi Oblada. Shout out to Desmond, you know, the trader, happy ever after in the marketplace and stuff. This guest knows a thing or two about how to stay above the markets. And then track 2, pretty sure of this, going with Getting Better. And I've got to admit, it's getting better and getting better in the better letter in my inbox every single time. And I'm very proud to say that. And clearly track 3, what else could be left? And it's specific to his career as much as his family life. I want to hold your hand. It's a tale as old as time. It's advice as old as time. Before you think this guest is as old as time, because that's not my point, he's had more thoughtful connections to music, history, markets, and living a life of intentionality than I can ever aspire to. Author of The Better Letter, an all-around beautiful human. Welcome to the show. Say hello, and not goodbye, please, Bob Seawright.
Thank you, Matt. The only thing you didn't include is my favorite is the second side of Abbey Road, which I don't think you got one of those titles in, but other than that, pretty good.
Hey, okay. Well, we'll aim higher for more deep cuts and B-sides coming up soon. This second guest that I got to introduce you today, we're giving him a 3-song mixtape too. And we're going to start right here. We're going to start with, because I know he's a true, at least in his darkest days, a lover of chaos, or at least reflecting on it. So no surprise, he's written about it lately. Everything is broken. People bending broken rules, hound dog howling, bullfrog croaking, everything is broken. And it's where the light gets in. But there's no time for remixes on that. Keep your Leonard Cohen out of this conversation. I'll do better than Hallelujah. This track 2, we're going full In the Garden of Eden. That's right, we're going to Inagata Davida. And I think you know a thing or two about that song. And I will honor either Iron Butterfly or that time The Simpsons did it. I would love a mashup of the two. I'm sure it exists somewhere on the internet. Unless this totally get out of control, get somber with me. Track 3 on his mixtape. Who'll stop the rain? Seriously, I really want to know, Jim. Who's going to stop the rain? Put him in, coach. He's the basket trading Vol Diaries poet of a man behind Vixologist. And yes, it's that JC, the one and only Jim Carroll. Say hello, Jim.
Hello, Jim.
That is the correct way to answer that question. I'm so excited. By the end of this conversation, you guys are going to guess why I needed to introduce Jim Carroll to Bob Seawright. But for starters, I mean, let's just get really into it. Morning music What'd you guys throw on? Is there music in the morning every day? Bob, did you listen to anything yet so far today? What got played?
Yeah, I actually one of my readers created a channel of the music I include in the Better Letter, and
Really?
and there's about 17 hours of music on it, and so I clicked on it.
Where does this live?
Uh, the one that begins with S,
Spotify.
Spotify.
The one that
Oh, we got a Spotify Bob Seawright playlist. Let's go.
we got the official Better Letter playlist. Is it seriously like it's cataloged all the stuff from all the Better Letters? Because like
Yes.
basically you, Dave Nottig, and a few other people, I will find myself, oh, this will take 10 minutes to read. And then 2 hours later, and like 2 hours of YouTube scrolling, I'm like, I don't even know if I finished the newsletter yet. All right, so wait, what did you hear this morning? What came on?
Well, it's usually pretty eclectic, but I got some Beatles, I got some James Taylor, I got some Carole King, I got some Eagles, including some Don Henley solo. The usual good stuff from my generation, Anagata Davida came out when I was in 7th grade.
Just in time for a middle school dance. Makes perfect sense.
It was worse than that. The middle school music teacher had everybody do a report on an album, and almost everybody did Anagata Davida. And it's iron butterfly, and iron signifies heavy, and butterfly signifies light. It's great.
Oh, nothing like it. What'd you write your 7th grade report on? Do you remember?
I don't. I just remember hearing everybody else talk about Anagata Davida.
Well, we can't all be Iron Butterfly all the time. What about you, Jim? What'd you listen to this morning?
So I actually dialed up I've been listening to YouTube music along with Spotify just to, I'm trying to get the YouTube music algorithm up to speed with my tastes. And I had psychedelic rock classics on this morning.
Okay.
I don't know why, I just felt a little psychedelic. And, it's definitely an acid flashback to the youth of, to Jim's youth. A lot of Doors, some Jefferson Airplane, Beach Boys. For some reason, it was throwing, and I know it's drug induced, some Velvet Underground in there, which is fine, but it seemed to be interrupting the mix, to be honest, this morning. I'll have to fine tune it.
But Lou is always worth listening to.
Lou is always worth listening to, and Lou can be an acquired taste. It was just a little disruptive this morning, but so I had a psychotic reaction.
Now, how do you guys pick the morning music? Is it just mood? Is it spontaneous? Like, Jim, do you have any approach to this? Like, why did you
for
pick
me?
this playlist?
Yeah, no, for me, it's pretty random, because I wouldn't say that my tastes are eclectic. You won't hear me listening to opera unless I need to fall asleep, which I did more than once with my wife when she instituted Culture Night back in the early days of our relationship. So I'll go to Spotify or I'll go to YouTube Music and just kind of look around and see what feels good. I am a blues addict, so there's a lot of blues music in my playlist, and that goes all the way back to Robert Johnson and Big Bill Broonzy and some of the old school blues guys, and obviously
All the way to Mark and Poe.
well, you got it. One of my current favorites, along with a few others. The blues are not dead.
What about you, Bob? Is there any rhyme or reason to what gets put on in the morning? Is there a mood setter?
The big question for me is whether to play it or not. And the reason I say it is for a long time, I was an habitual music junkie, turned it on. But then I tested not playing music. I started the test on Saturday mornings when I was doing chores, and I turned off the music and just kind of thought about stuff. And I found I was unbelievably successful at finding stuff to write about or ideas or thinking through things because of the quiet. And I ultimately had to start putting a pad and pencil in my pocket to capture the ideas I got while I was, trying to do stuff way over my pay grade around the house.
Nothing like inspiration when your hands are wet doing dishes or something.
Or in the shower. It's classic.
Yeah.
Not as good as when your hands are wet because there's a leak.
Yeah. Well, you don't fix that leak, you don't get culture night with your wife. That's what I've heard.
That's fair.
So both of you draw a lot of inspiration from music and stuff you write. So like Bob, that's interesting. How do you reconcile the silence and how stuff comes to you when you don't have stuff going on in the background versus like music as inspiration? Like in the silence, you're then thinking about music and thinking about connections to this stuff, or?
Sometimes, mostly I write a sentence and it makes a connection with a song. And so, either the lyric fits or, it sounds like it fits. And then this is one of the ways the internet is particularly great. I can check those lyrics. I mean, I remember when Sgt. Pepper came out and they had the unique idea to put the lyrics on the back of the album, which was a totally new thing at the time. And before that, we were left trying to decipher what the lyrics were, which of course created debates and disagreements. And that was kind of fun, but it's nice to be able to check.
Did in 7th grade, did In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida have the lyrics on the back of that album?
No, that was
20
before
minutes?
Sgt. Pepper.
That's what I thought. Young buck here. I got to ask these important, hard-hitting journalistic questions, Jim, what about you? Do you do silence time for inspiration? Is that a...
Occasionally, I find that that some background music can quiet things for me. I'm not necessarily really listening to it, but I think what it does is it calms down that monkey that lives in my brain, that chimp who's always chattering if he's not distracted. And so I think music can distract the chimp and allow me to think in what can only be described as relative isolation.
That's a fair word for it, relative isolation. Do you see it that way as being like, does it help if it's something that has like a baseline rhythm to it? Does it help if it's more?
It really doesn't matter a lot, I find. Bob will appreciate this. I did my high school homework listening to the first 3 Jimi Hendrix albums, on our stereo in the family living room, because that's what we had. That's where records were played. It kind of destroyed the records after some period of time, but, then you just go buy another copy. My parents were deeply concerned that I was doing my homework listening to this racket. My father was a Lawrence Welk fan, so to say we were on opposite ends of the musical spectrum would be fair. But I did very well in high school, and so I thought, maybe there's something to this.
There's a funny YouTube clip of, and was it Guy and Ralna or something from Lawrence Welk, and the reason I know that is because in the early days of VCRs, I had a job in school at a BOCES school in New York, and I worked Saturday and Sunday nights, 4 to 12, recording shows on Sony Betamaxes for teachers who wanted them. And so I'd record Nova or, whatever. And if there wasn't much on TV to edit the commercials out and the like, I would make copies from the master library that teachers wanted. And Lawrence Welk was on Saturday nights, and you can find it on YouTube. I won't tell you how I happen to know that, but Guy and was her name Ralna or something on Lawrence Welk, and they sang "One Toke Over the Line"
On Lawrence Welk.
on Lawrence Welk, and Lawrence Welk introduced it as a modern spiritual.
It's not,
Thank you, Bobby and Sissy.
it's not wrong.
That was
in that job, or any other, did you ever have any other jobs that included like transferring media like that? That's a unique piece of the past.
well, especially those are early days, right?
Right.
This was like 1974, 75.
That was not some little cassette deck that you carried around with you.
No, that was the big old VCR, the big VCR.
Although transferring media is how I got to Wall Street.
We'll tell that story.
I was still practicing law and I hated it. And I was going to a charity function with a good friend. It was a board meeting for a charity we were on with a friend of mine who was worked on the Merrill Lynch fixed income trading floor. And this was shortly after Christmas in 1992. And I was grousing because I was representing CBS in litigation with Viacom because Viacom had a syndication agreement with CBS where, in our day, if you stayed home sick from school, you had three choices, maybe four. You had the CBS affiliate, the NBC affiliate, the ABC affiliate, and maybe an independent station. I grew up near Buffalo. Channel 29 was the independent station. And Viacom had syndication rights to the old CBS shows, Gunsmoke, Green Acres, the stuff you see on TV Land or Nickelodeon now. And they had these contracts in place for years. They had to sell them first to the CBS affiliate if they wanted. Then they could sell it to an independent. Obviously, ABC was never going to show it. When VCRs became ubiquitous, there was a dispute that the contracts had never contemplated, which was that whether the syndication rights included the right to syndicate via VCR. And I was going into New York City on the 6:20 train in the morning. I was coming out on the 11:50 at night through Christmas, and I was not having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And my buddy said to me, "Well, why don't you come and work with us on the trading floor?" And I said, "Well, I don't know anything about finance or markets." He said, "It doesn't matter. That's not an inhibitor." And I said, "Yeah, but I'm pretty good at this lawyer thing. I hate it, but I'm pretty good at it. I'm paid pretty well." He said, "We can handle that too." And 6 weeks later, I was on the Merrill Lynch fixed income trading floor, never to practice law again, thanks to syndication agreements and Viacom trying to stick it to CBS and CBS trying to stick it to Viacom.
Funny how those things twist and turn, isn't it? What about you, Jim? What was you didn't exactly have a clear shot path either to that entry into Wall Street, if you will.
No. Well, it goes back to really how I grew up. My father was an accidental career Army officer. He was in World War II in the Army Air Corps, served in North Africa after they took him off one of the planes that flew into Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. And he went back to work for his dad. His dad passed away. He didn't like his dad's partner, went back in the Army. So I was born in Queens, in New York. I left before I was a year old, and we moved every 4 years. He retired just as I was going into high school, so settled us back in San Diego where he had grown up. So at the end of high school, it was time to move. Well, I guess the family's not going anywhere, but I am. So off to college. Actually did ROTC in college. And in college, thought economics, I guess that's business. And I guess, I want to be in business. I want to get a job. So maybe I'll study economics until the guy said, assume rational behavior. And I said, this was before behavioral economics was a thing. And, but I said in my naivete, I don't know who he hangs out with, but this makes no sense to me. And I was taking an elective course in the psychology department for organizational behavior. So, let's do that. And I was actually lucky. There was a guy teaching. I went to Claremont, what is now Claremont McKenna College. There was a guy teaching psychology at Pomona across the street who had been a teaching assistant for Timothy Leary back in the Harvard acid days. And Bob Schwitzgable taught us a lot, and it was usually an evening class because he didn't wake up till noon. And I remember one evening he said, I've got one piece of career advice for you knuckleheads. You're going to have to think about it. He said, for every pathology, there's a profession. And it took me a while to find my pathology, but it turns out that my pathology was everything about the markets and Wall Street. I started as an investment banker, did that for a bunch of years at 3 firms that no longer exist. I had nothing to do with their demise. Smith Barney, Kidder Peabody, and Bear Stearns. They just, went over like dominoes as I got there. And switched to the investment advisory business after the internet bubble collapsed, and I had a bunch of friends who had their hair on fire and their accounts cut in half and asked me if I knew how to manage money. I said, sure. And the other lesson I learned during my investment banking days, I had a lot of clients who were entrepreneurs, and I came to realize that they didn't see that they couldn't do what they wanted to do. So they did it. And it was that notion that, what other people perceive as risk, it can be seen as opportunity. So, my path has been a little circuitous. I a little over a year ago, joined a new firm. We're having a lot of fun, doing some cool things. I just hope on my 4th anniversary that I don't feel this undeniable urge to change horses or do something crazy. We'll see.
Every piece of pathology has a profession. I wish I'd come up with that. I'm going to steal it.
Yeah. Unpack that a little bit more for us, Jim. Like, how did you come to understand that? I already wrote that down. That's phenomenal.
Because, we all have something that triggers us. We all have something that we can't not do. And I have a great example in my wife's circle. She grew up with a woman who married a guy who was bound and determined to be a screenwriter. His father had been a screenwriter. He was a bartending, guitar-playing screenwriter, making no money. And he's now, he's a good William Goldman was one of his mentors. His father and William Goldman were good friends. I won't dox him, but he now runs Disney's Star Wars franchise. He went in to fix a script many, many years ago, fixed it. It was one of the Star Wars sequels. And while that was not his particular genre, he took to it, and they dangled very large sums of money in front of him. But that was a case where he had to write. He didn't know how to do. He could play the guitar and he could 10 bar, but he had to write. It was an illness. He couldn't do anything else. And I think, it's kind of a perverse form of follow your passion, which gets poo-pooed all the time. And I think, for some reasonable reason, just because you really like something doesn't mean you're going to be any good at it. So anyway, it's a perversion on follow your passion, but I prefer for every pathology, there's a profession.
What's your brain running with on that one, Bob? You hear that expression, what's your brain do?
Well, the thing it isn't a linear connection, but my wife says all the time, and she told her fifth graders all the time, it's a lie that you can be anything you want. You can't. There aren't restrictions on you other than your own abilities and your own willingness to try. But if you're 5'5" and slow, you're not going to play in the NBA no matter how badly you want to. If that were true, I would be signing cards at baseball card shows now, and talking about my induction in the Hall of Fame rather than doing what I'm doing. So that's where I went.
Is there and really, I'm going to be stuck on this for a second. The you can't do anything you want, which I think is really important. I can't remember which comedian, could have been Tosh. One of them had the great line about like giving the speech, the graduation speech at the technical school, being like, this is a sad thing. Because you tell kids you can be everything you want, and then you get to this school and they're like, we read 3 things. There's basically 3 things. You can choose one of these 3. But there's a life lesson in that. When did you first realize, Bob, that you weren't going to be a pro baseball player? When did you accept it in your heart?
When I hurt my arm.
How old?
First time, 12.
So you were a pitcher?
Yeah.
So what happened?
Actually, a remarkable precursor to MLB now. I changed my delivery to try to throw harder, to get my velocity up. It was stupid in multiple ways. Number one, my natural motion with a 2-seam fastball had fantastic sink, and it made it very difficult to hit. And when I changed the motion for velocity and switched from a 2-seam to a 4-seam fastball, I threw it harder and I hurt my arm, but it wasn't as effective because I didn't have the movement. But I really learned the lesson with music, not with baseball.
So what's that story?
I, like every, school musician, I aspired to make All-State, and I did. And this was in New York. And in those days, I don't know if it's true now, there was a week in November at the Concord Hotel in Kiamisha Lake in the Catskills, kind of Dirty Dancing-esque. And the All-State musical groups would come while the music teachers were having their annual conference and convention. And you rehearsed for 3 days, and then you put on a concert. And in this area, I want to emphasize that in this area it is, because this is a little self-aggrandizing. But I was self-aware enough to know that I wasn't I wasn't going to make music my career. I am a good amateur. That's as far as it goes. I got paid to do a variety of things in music over the years, but nobody's going to say, "Oh, wow, look at him." And at the Concord Hotel in Kiamisha Lake, there were a whole lot of high school seniors who were sure that they were going to be the next great thing in music, cramming into elevators with dozens of other kids who also thought their future was being a magnificent musician that everybody wanted to hear. And there was a shocking amount of depression and looking for alcohol or drugs by people there because their world had been blown up in a way they hadn't expected.
One of the worst industries on the planet.
Yes.
What about you, Jim? What's the realization moment where a dream, an aspiration, something that you're reaching for was all of a sudden like clearly out of reach to you?
Well, I had a similar experience in sports, although my sport was football. The only thing I could do, and I probably should have been a baseball pitcher because I had a very strong arm. In high school, I could throw a football 60 yards without trying too hard, and was recruited, small time, small ball, because, I'm all of 5'10" and a half. And even in those days, that was just, not quite tall enough to get UCLA excited. And so I actually made a very wise choice, which was to go to a school that was much better academically than it was athletically. Although the football team 2 years before I got there had been nationally ranked in what was then NAIA, now D3. So who knew, but sophomore year, I kind of said, this ain't going anywhere. I am not Joe Theismann. This is fun and all that. But maybe I should focus on the academics because football has a due date, and that due date is now. I probably avoided a series of additional concussions that might have left scars. It was not hard to make that decision when I made that decision.
My youngest played football at Cal and is very grateful for his Berkeley education.
Yeah, I think, unless you're, unless you've got all the right tools and the right physique, go to a school that also has good academics.
All right. College advice for kids for a second on that exact topic. Like, how do you talk to young people when you both engage with young people? I see you doing it all over the place, cross generations here. That advice right there. Go for the academics, figure out that. How do you balance academics with passion, a purpose, or whatever a pathology you haven't totally unpacked yet? What advice do you give it an 18-year-old who's thinking this through, Jim?
The advice, so there are two levels. One is undergrad, and the other one would be, grad school, and MBA is, what I have and what people want to talk to me about. But undergrad, my observation is that it's less about the school and more about your attitude going into the school and being determined to get the most out of it. Because, I think many of us look back fondly on our college days because we drank a lot, slept late, and chased girls. And that was all part of the program. And that's actually where I learned how to play the guitar. But
I'm sure there's a connection.
I love it. And I went to a fantastic school and learned a lot and had some fabulous professors. I think the challenge for anybody, and holy crap, these days, the cost of school, and oh, by the way, I think on average, the quality has probably gone downhill. That's conjecture on my part. But I think the goal has to be to squeeze every last drop of whatever it is you're trying to get out of that experience. Chase professors down the hall and ask them all the stupid questions you've got. Talk to that weird kid who knows everything about some subject that you're not as good at. It's not a vacation. And I think that's something that is impressed on most kids, but maybe not all. My son was not the best high school student. He had ADHD. Has ADHD. Smart kid, very creative. If you read what he wrote, you'd think, damn, there are a lot of great ideas in here. If only the grammar made any sense at all. He and I made a deal. I thought he should go on a full year, gap year. He had, not Outward Bound. Anyway, I found a program for him. He loves being outside. He loves, physical challenges. He convinced me that he was ready to go to school, and he did a good job. But I think we had to come to a place where he was ready to go in and do a good job. Now, he had a lot of fun. We'll probably say he drank more than he should have. But I think it's less about getting into Princeton than it is getting into a school and squeezing the life out of it.
What about you, Bob? What advice are you giving?
My best college advice is never skip class.
So once you're there, whatever it may be for.
Yep.
You're
Never skip class. Not just because that maximizes what you can learn, but it's really practical as well. You don't have to work nearly as hard if you never skip class, because the professor is going to be inclined to look kindly on people who never cut. And you're going to learn most of the time you'll have a whole lot better idea of what's going to be on the final, or what your paper should look like or sound like or be about. And as a parent, oh, by the way, you might hear something or see something or find something that really fits for you. So my best advice, never, ever skip class.
So, Bob, did you not have that dream where you wake up and realize that you have a final in a class that you never attended? And you're in your underwear?
No, the worst dream wasn't a dream. The worst dream for most law students is getting this, being on the hot seat for the whole period, for what they blithely called a Socratic dialogue. My civil procedure professor at Duke was a remarkable man with a Princeton PhD in the classics, besides his legal history and legal education, and he was a total good old boy with horrible polyester jackets, and he'd lean over the lectern and speak in a drawl. And I remember like it was yesterday when he called on a woman in the row ahead of me, who was a friend of mine and I happened to know had not done the preparation. And he asks a very difficult question, and she hems and haws and stammers and says, "I'm sorry, I'm not sure." And Professor J. Francis Pascal, a name you cannot forget, leaned over the lectern, put his hand like here, and said, "Wait, why don't you start by telling us just what it is you're vacillating between. And that's my nightmare.
I had a very similar experience in business school.
What was it?
So I avoided studying accounting undergrad. I took one class, and I had a roommate who was there to major in accounting and became a successful CPA, and he was one of the nerdiest people I'd ever met. So I determined that accounting was a subject I didn't need to master. Got to business school, and they called it at Harvard, they call it control, because they don't ever call anything, what it might be identified with. And the course was taught by, exactly. The course was taught by a woman named Regina Hertzlinger, who was the only female full professor at HBS at the time. And she was a Mae West character. She, saunter into the classroom and have this whole vibe going on. And it was the second day of classes the first year. And it was the afternoon class. At lunch, I was comparing notes with a guy who had been a CPA, and I had it all wrong. And so I'm trying to hide. I'm up in what we've referred to as the sky deck, the last row of these, arena-style classrooms. And sure enough, Reggie points up and says, Jim Carroll, why don't you get us started? And I said, in a moment of vivid lucidity, I said, well, Professor Hertzlinger, would you like the answer I had last night or the one I got at lunch? And, a little titter in the audience. It's early in the year, so people don't really want to laugh much. That I don't care, just get us started. Same idea.
Did you go with the advice you got at lunch? Did you like that?
I don't remember. I don't remember anything. I blacked out.
These are important.
But it was all about just, that just somehow I managed to find that tiny little bit of poise that lightened the situation and caused my sweat glands to calm down.
And probably got you hired.
It wasn't for my accounting skills, but I think. Well, look, I applied to 2 business schools because my cousin, who's the family genius, was going back to school a year ahead of me. And she had applied to the top 10 schools, been accepted by all 10, and was deciding between Harvard and Stanford. I was about to be promoted to captain in the Army. I was not going to stay in the Army. I knew no one other than my cousin who was going to business school. I had applied to Berkeley to go part-time because I was at the Presidio of San Francisco, whole separate story there. So I had Berkeley as my backup. So I said, well, geez, I looked at my wallet. I saw that I had enough money to apply to 2 schools. So I applied to the 2 schools, got into Harvard. It's like, how the hell did that happen? Well, I figured it out in the first week of school. They love ex-military officers because we have experienced the leadership that they're trying to train people for. And so, some people think, ROTC through college, why the hell did you do that? Well, it worked out.
Ironically, depending on the timing, Kahneman was probably at Berkeley when you would have been there.
I look back on that. I look back on that in the context of my observation that, rational economics made no sense to me. Yes, I could have been one of the pioneers of behavioral economics had only I run across Danny Kahneman at the time.
If you hadn't gotten into Harvard, I'll
Who
come look out
knows?
for you too.
Who knows?
I want to ask you both about this because it's part of that leadership and it's part of learning that craft and where the love of it comes from. You both love writing, or at least you seem to love writing, because most people, even when they do something like writing, you have to hate it too. But there's something that makes you do it again. And I think that attention is some level of love. Where's the love of writing come from for you, Bob?
Oh, that's a great question. Being a lawyer is great for teaching you to write because you have to write a lot on a deadline and it has to be coherent. but it doesn't teach you to love to write. And that came to be later. I eventually learned the best way for me to figure out what I thought and to figure out, at least for my standards, if what I thought cohered was by trying to write it. I found lots of bad ideas out because I tried to write them and it just didn't work. And so I kind of backed into loving it that way.
How old? Like where in life does that realization start to set in for you? Is it after the law stuff or is it during the law stuff?
That was after the law stuff. Yeah, I had practiced. I liked writing briefs. I loved the appellate work. It's about the only thing about being a lawyer that I liked at all. I was a very good brief writer, and I was good on my feet, so that, the oral argument stuff was fun. You just don't do that very much of the time. So it was later, and I started to write Above the Market, which was my blog, like almost 20 years ago now. And I started doing it as a commitment device because, I was a new chief investment officer and I was giving the same advice all the time to advisors. And I decided I wanted a place to store stuff so I didn't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And I decided I needed stuff in writing so that I could test if I had been right, because I only remembered that I was right. I never remembered the times I got it wrong, shockingly. So having it in digital print allowed me to check my work in a way I wasn't able to.
And do you think the technology was an important part of that to you? Like, because you're writing briefs, like we're going back to pen, paper, and probably typewriters, then early computers for you. And again, not to date you, because I'm an 80s kid who learned to type on a typewriter first because mom was a newspaper editor. So
it wasn't even that. It was yellow legal pads and pens and Xerox copying cases out of law books and cutting out the part I was quoting it and taping it on the yellow pad to give it to the word processing department to turn it into text.
Yeah.
Now that's not the way it's done, but stuff in those days was only submitted on paper, and you always worked up right up to the deadline, and then the messenger service came and picked it up and took it to the courthouse and brought it back with the filed stamp on it. And the ability to seamlessly and easily put stuff effectively on paper, digitally in a way that lasts and looks pretty good. That was great.
That's a big plus. That word processor, go figure. What about you, Jim? Love of writing. When's...
Yeah, and I don't even think of myself as a writer, to be honest. I'm my attention span is short, so my writing tends to be concise, brief, but it does help me. What Bob was talking about. If I spit it out and read it again, does it make sense? What am I missing? What am I leaving out? What am I putting in that doesn't belong there? How do I take what's in my head and communicate it to other people in a way that hopefully they find useful in some fashion? And look, my subject matter of choice is arcane, to put it kindly. But it helps me to better understand, to better contextualize what it is I'm trying to do in the world. and maybe share it in a way that's useful to other people who are trying to understand some of the same stuff.
How do you think about that? And I think this is actually important. Yes, it's arcane. Say what you write about, just in case, because I don't know if Bob's actually seen this yet. Say what you write
So-
about, and then I want you to contextualize the arcaneness of it to the audience. Because there's
Yeah.
there's this little thing people talk about, like, oh, you find your niche or you find your people who care.
Right.
And that can get bastardized in all sorts of ways. But it's also really interesting to find somebody who's intensely curious about some topic, no matter how arcane.
So I'll rewind and then bring it forward as quickly as I can. It's 2015, and I've been in this business for less than 10 years on the investment advisory side, and I'm reading all this stuff that says, "Gee, interest rates are really low, bonds suck. PE ratios are really high, stocks suck. The 10-year outlook for everything is crap." And so I'm trying, oh God, okay. So where can I add value? I'd read all the stuff about commodity. Well, that came later. I'd read all the stuff about, putting commodities in your portfolio and how they're uncorrelated and blah, blah, blah. And the problem I found with that is that they're uncorrelated because they lose money on a routine basis. Where can I find something that adds value? It's different. It's uncorrelated. It's off the run. It's something that there's not a lot of chatter about, not a lot of expertise. And I tripped over volatility. And a bunch of academic work had been done. Wall Street and its infinite blessings coming out of the global financial crisis had invented exchange traded products that allowed you to bet on the direction of volatility, higher or lower. And so I just went down that rabbit hole and said, okay, let's figure out if there's a way that I can take this stuff and use it in a systematic fashion, in a disciplined fashion. I'm a believer that if you're going to stray from the, strategic asset allocation, buy and hold dogma that exists in our industry, you better have your shit together and you better be able to explain yourself and have discipline and system around it. And so the short version is I came up with a way to decide whether I wanted to be long vol or short vol. I had the instruments to go do it and started using some of it in 2016, right after Brexit, and continue to do it. It has morphed and evolved, and it continues to morph and evolve. But it's different, that's for sure. And people love it or hate it, and that's okay with me. I joke because when you talk about volatility, people automatically think about derivatives, options, futures, yada, yada, yada. And I don't trade options. And people are like, what? How can you be a volatility guy and you don't trade options? I say, look, I was a psychology major. I spent 4 years in the Army. I went to business school. I became an investment banker. I'm not a PhD in anything, much less math or computer science. So I let the smart kids do all the option stuff. And I stay in this little pond over here with these arcane volatility exchange traded products that nobody wants to use. Jim, that's so ridiculous. Why don't you do it this way? Why don't you do it that way? I'm like, well, because I don't want to compete with you.
Right.
People are going to leave me alone. The pond that I play in is too small for Citadel and Millennium and Eliasny and all these smart guys. I have no interest in competing with them. So I just fuss around with my little volatility exchange traded products and do just fine, thank you.
And does the writing about it, does that just help you solve what you're thinking, what you're trying to communicate in the
Yes, and look, Twitter is a blessing and a curse, right? You got to use it properly. Twitter, FinTwit specifically, has allowed me to engage with people that I probably never would have found or met or gotten to know. Many of whom are, smarter than I will ever be. Yeah, I could name names, but let's not. And the great thing is, these are people who are regular people. I mean, they'll happy to chat about what it is they know and understand, and I can throw something out there and get all the people telling me where I'm crazy. Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
I need that. I need people to tell me what I'm missing, because then I can go figure it out. So that writing for me is a form of engagement. And it's a way to get feedback. It's a way to crystallize my own thinking, because you got to do that before you put it down on a piece of, or you put it down on a piece of paper and you read it back and you say, does this make any sense at all? Tweak it a little bit and put it out there and let people tell you how you screwed it up.
You're looking.
I don't know if there's a better way to learn. Co-creators. Yeah.
That's the stuff right there. All right, looking for co-creators. This is kind of for both of you. Like, so Jim, you purposely put all these music references in there. You're just baiting me constantly. How do you think about the personal reflections that you add into this stuff? Even if they're subtle, but they're always, always, always there. How do you think about, why is that important to you to include?
Because music has always been important to me. Ever since I was a little kid, I sang choir in middle school and, should have kept up with that. I learned how to play guitar and I still suck. But music has been important to me as far back as I can remember. I had two older sisters who, introduced me to, that the stuff coming out in the early 60s, Elvis and all the Motown stuff, the British invasion. I mean, come on. The 60s were just such a monstrous melting pot of fantastic music. And then I took that and ran off with it, in my own direction, which sort of took me down the Mississippi to the Delta and then back up to Chicago and, every place else. And so for me, it just is something that has always spoken to me. It always will. And it's just, yeah. And I'm looking right now at a song written in 1971 by Kenny Loggins and Jim Messina, Same Old Wine. We give them the election. They keep filling our heads full of lies. We can trust in new directions when their promises are in disguise. Well, someday the truth will catch up. I just hope it don't catch us all by surprise. Could that be any more relevant? How many years? 50 years later? It's like, have we evolved as a species? Maybe.
Jury's out on that one.
Right?
Human nature does not change.
Jim O'Shaughnessy, who again is somebody that I met on Twitter, what are the last great arbitrages? Human behavior. And as a behavioral psychologist, that's what I do.
Bob, what about you? And I'm specifically just thinking about the desire to write about something like markets, things that are going on in the world, but then interjecting the music, and you interject music and baseball and all sorts of, same thing. It's just catnip for my brain.
But
Why do you feel, what feels right about adding all that stuff that's not face value related?
I started doing this without any expectation of readers. And I still remember the first time Tadas Viscantha included one of my pieces in Abnormal Returns.
It is a rite of passage. Tadas is a rite of passage.
And I had, the tally in the analytics section of WordPress. I had over 100 readers that day, and I thought I had died and gone to heaven. And so I wrote from the start in a way that engaged and interested me because I didn't expect readers. So I tried to be creative with it to help me remember it or to think about it differently, and that seems to work for me. even now that I actually have readers sometimes.
I got some notes. I want to take you through some notes. And I'm starting on that last point, though. Because I want to pull this thread just a tiny bit further before I go back to the beginning of this conversation. The best day you can have as a writer doesn't matter if 10 people read it or 10 million people read it. Now, I'm sure if you sell 10 million copies of your book or something, you get a nice check and that feels
Hi, Morgan.
different. Honorary shout out. Another taught us rite of passage discovery. But there's that reality that feeling, like the great feeling, even when the 100 people see your post, is a great feeling. Like the feeling doesn't change if it's 10 million or if it's 100. What is there some like nugget of truth inside that, Bob?
Well, it's certainly humbling, or at least it should be, that people are going to pay attention to what I have to say. Anyone who's married knows how rare that is. So it's wonderful to think that people are reading it. Sometimes it's because they like it. Sometimes it's because they hate it. Most of the time it's both, and that's a pretty good thing. I've written many times about Kahneman's advice to me. I asked him once, one of the times I got to meet him, I asked, which, one of these things is not like the other, right? In Sesame Street. I asked him how you can best mitigate your humanity, your bias problems. And he laughed and said, but not entirely jokingly, get some of your smartest and least empathetic friends and have them tear what you think apart. And that's fantastic advice. And so the thought that people are reading and engaging with me is something I don't take for granted, and that is a wonderful blessing.
All right, Jim, here's the big question for you to lead it off with. Favorite song on the second LP of Abbey Road? You got one for us? I mean, I should have trolled him with "Never Give Me the Money," right? Like I should have gone like somewhere like that.
So this is going to disappoint anyone who listens to this. I should be the Beatles should be my number one all-time favorite, band, and I love the Beatles, and I think it's genius, and they were all geniuses in their own way, but Paul McCartney wakes up every day, has a toke, goes to the mailbox, collects this royalty check for $15 million, and goes back and has another toke. His life is just so freaking charmed, but I can't stand it. I'm much more with the troubled types. The Jim Morrison, the Jimi Hendrix, the Janis Joplins. Even John Fogerty's trials and tribulations over the rights to his music. And I just have a very broad interest in different kinds of music. I'm not the one who's going to listen to 3 hours of Indian raga music with Derek Trucks, but the Beatles are great.
The Beatles are great. Now, what about stick with the troubled thing? We were talking about the 7th grade paper and how everybody did Inagata Devita. I will disclose my 7th grade paper was on Stevie Ray Vaughan. I read a book that was entirely too old for young me. And I learned a lot about Crown Royal and cocaine. Oh, you could, but I had a lot of. My mom was my English teacher that year. Also didn't help the cause. But did you write any formal papers, Jim, or anything on any of those troubled spirits?
No, I never did.
Missed opportunity.
Yeah, no. Well, look. So middle school for me was in Honolulu, Hawaii. My dad's last tour of duty. He was the professor of military science at the University of Hawaii. He's trying to finish a PhD, This is in the late 60s. And here's this Army officer trying to finish a PhD at the University of Hawaii. You might suspect that it was not a conservative institution. Anyway, I went to the Iolani School for Boys, not Punahou, where Obama went, the rival. And I remember reading David Copperfield twice in 4 years. This was a school where they were going to, beat into us all the stuff that we should know. And so there was no room for, silliness like writing about musicians.
Yeah, stick to the magicians. They're so much better. Totally different trauma set.
It was, and high school was in San Diego, public high school. And I did learn a little bit about writing because there was a guy, Andy Anderson, who was creative writing teacher. But that was, I certainly didn't write anything about, my favorite musical influences. Don't ask me why. It was never an assignment.
What's the best concert you ever went to?
There you go.
Oh, wow. Cream reunion. Saw them twice at Madison Square Garden when they came around. No question about it. I've seen a lot of concerts, but, to have those three guys back while Jack was still hanging on and Ginger was not being Ginger. That was phenomenal.
What about you, Bob?
Oh, that one's easy. I was in Central Park in October of 1981 when Simon and Garfunkel got back to.
Wow. That had to be a whole other experience.
It was great.
I can't even imagine, especially there in Central Park. Pull this thread then for me. I put him on the spot with the Beatles and putting you on the spot with Hendrix. You had to do homework to a Jimi Hendrix album. I'm reserving it to the first three. We don't want to get into the experimental or the offshoot stuff. What would you do?
Well, there really were only 3 albums.
Right. There's 3 true albums.
And then Paul Allen bought the estate.
Which is your favorite?
Wow.
That's a hard choice for that catalog.
Probably Are You Experienced?
That's where I'd go to. I am not nearly deep enough into left-handed guitarists. But yeah, I'd go there.
That's fair. That's a good starting point.
Yeah, but if you wanted to take sort of my favorite song, definitely cross over the different albums, and then go to cover versions, which I'm a huge cover version person, because when I played in bands, we were obviously playing covers of whatever it was we thought was cool. And occasionally doing mashups of songs we were covering. And so I'm a big fan of, a song like Little Wing that Hendrix and Derek and the Dominoes took, and then Stevie Ray did. And, I think Jimmy's influence on his contemporaries and people who grew up listening to him is, immense.
I have a personal YouTube music playlist of Dylan covers.
Everything is broken.
I've heard Dylan in concert 3 times, and the last time I heard him, I'm not making it up, and I know Dylan reasonably well. I didn't recognize a single song except for the 3 Sinatra covers he did.
Well, Butler's not your normal run-of-the-mill guy, but there's a series.
A lot.
There's a series of cover albums, and Bob, if you haven't found these, you got to find them. It's called All Bluesed Up, and there's one on there's one for the Rolling Stones, there's one for Bob Dylan, there's one for Led Zeppelin, there's one for Janis Joplin. and the cover versions, well, and it's kind of humorous to me that you've got all of these sort of serious old school blues musicians covering Led Zeppelin, covering old serious blues musicians, because all those Zeppelin songs were ripoffs in the first place.
There's a special reflexivity about that, but yeah. Okay. All right, we got listening homework to do. Jim, you're the one who said this, and Bob, I'm just hitting this one more time because it's just the way that these fell on the page that really got me here. For every pathology, there's a profession. Risk is opportunity. It's a lie that you can be anything you want. The risk is opportunity in the middle of that one kind of caught me in a funny way when I'm just looking at these notes on this page in front of me, Bob. How do you think about risk as opportunity? But then, I mean, for every pathology, there's a path, all the different ways that you can go. And then to think about anything you want, it's seeing things as like a spectrum of opportunity as opposed to a single path.
Well, and if you grow up in a trading floor environment, everything's a trade. And every conversation is a trade. And so if someone says something stupid or believes something stupid, the idea is don't get mad. Don't yell at them. Bet against them. And that's the way risk is opportunity.
Well, it reminds me of Andy Duke, right? Thinking of bets. It's a similar concept. You know, we're making bets all day, every day. The consequences aren't necessarily, you know, things we think of as associated with a bet. But we're making decisions. We're assessing probabilities. Well, maybe we're assessing probabilities. Maybe we're just, you know, doing shit and hoping it works out. But you know, that's a framework that I think is obviously a big deal in, you know, our industry. But it's not a framework that necessarily every kid understands.
Stay with me on this specifically because it was one of the things that Bob said and whatever the iconically named teacher was that you referenced, and I'm not going to do the Southern drawl for this, but this idea of when the girl didn't know the answer and he says, if you're not sure, start with what you're vacillating between. Because there's another decision part inside of that that's actually a pretty useful framework, assuming you know what you're vacillating between, of course. How do you think about that? Like, is that a good piece of advice to just start with what you're vacillating between, Jim?
So it makes me think about this other concept that wanders through our lives called intuition. And, you know, sometimes it's not obvious whether we should go left or right, up or down, bet big or bet small. And so, you know, to what extent do you feel like you're in touch with the universe? And that intuition plays a role in decision-making. You know, I've read Gary Klein, and there's a lot of controversy around this notion of intuition. I happen to be somebody who thinks it should be embraced, not rejected. I don't think it's the foundation for good decision-making, but I think it comes into play more often than, you know, hardcore decisionistas might want to say it does.
Benedict Cumberbatch as Sherlock Holmes, season 4, episode 1, I know that because I watched it last night, makes the exact same point.
Where'd you find it? Every time I've gone to rewatch that and stream it in the last few years, I feel like it's been hiding somewhere.
It's now being shown on PBS Masterpiece, and so you can set your DVR.
Fantastic. All right. Hold on with this one then, Bob. Something that Jim said that I really loved, and this one's definitely not on either of your playlists. Either you guys big Nobodies fan? Do you listen to the Nobodies? You shouldn't have. And you should go back and listen to the meet. But forever, as someone addled with ADHD and an affliction for crusty punk rock bands, they had this great album called Short Songs for Short Attention Spans. Yeah. And it was, you know, a less than 30-minute album with like 30 songs, and they're all 30 seconds long or whatever. And it's just stuck with me forever as one of the most brilliant conventions of like, if I have a short attention span, I should just write short songs. You know, there's an intuition and there's a curiosity and there's all these threads in understanding that framework of how you're wired. What do you think about that, Bob?
Well, the first thing I jump to is in my day job, I do a monthly piece of just charts that I save and find. And one I just pulled is how average song length has dramatically decreased over time. And it's a chart which shows, 10 or 12 genres, and all average song length is decreasing. And given TikTok, which I don't use because it's a psyop, but given TikTok, is it any wonder that our attention spans are getting shorter, and the stuff we're watching is getting shorter? And as an advocate for long form, I find that largely disappointing. Not that I don't fantastically admire people who can do it short and sweet. That's not my strength. But another aside, the Financial Times asked me to blog for them at one point, and I only ever published one because it was such a dreadful experience. I said I'd never do it again. They wanted 600 words, and it went through 3 levels of editor, and they either didn't think I had enough there, but then when I added the next editor said, but it's too long, and it,
Yeah, that's a rough one. That's a rough one. All right, it is definitely time to play this game. I still have been shocked that you guys haven't met with all this stuff going on here. Do you want to guess what I wrote down on the other side of this card? I don't even know if it makes sense anymore, but I think it makes enough sense.
San Diego.
San Diego would have been a great thing to say. What else do you say, Bob Seawright? Is there any other thing that you think is on the back of this card?
Well, we should have met in a club, if nothing else.
Yeah, you're not lying. There should be music somewhere. Jim, what about you? What do you think? Why did I want you?
I think the thread, certainly there's a common thread that either starts with music and ends with writing, or starts with writing and ends with music.
It's got to be in there. So here's what I wrote. I wrote down blues in the verse, gospel in the chorus, truant songs, and life. I think you guys both embody that in a really, really beautiful and fantastic way. I admire both your writing. Bob, if people want to follow along, if they want to get the better letter, where are you sending them to bug you on the internet these days?
betterletter.substack.com.
Go sign up. You won't regret it. Jim, what about you? Where should they find you and hound you on the internet?
So I can be found on X/Twitter at Vixologist, and Vixology.substack.com. It's like making cocktails with nitroglycerin.
Who doesn't want to drink that? Come on now. We'll put all the links, all the ways to connect with these guys in the comments. I'll write some posts over on cultishcreative.com. I definitely have a ton in this one that I cannot wait to reflect on personally. Guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Pleasure.
And we're out. Thanks for joining us. Like, comment, and hey, subscribe below to Cultish Creative on YouTube if you haven't already. As the good compliance people want me to remind you, Matt Zeigler, that's me, is a managing director at Sunpoint Investments. The opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Sunpoint Investments. No information on this podcast should be construed as investment advice. Securities discussed in the podcast may be holdings of clients of Sunpoint Investments. I hope you've been entertained. I hope you found this useful. I hope you talk to a professional before you try any of this stuff at home. And most of all, I hope you've subscribed. Be nice to each other out there. And don't forget, head over to cultishcreative.com and let's make curiosity a habit together. And I'm out.